happy to have a discussion and help answer any questions. And I guess, Billy, do you want to come up here? Because I think we're doing this jointly, right?
This one works. Does this one work?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Billy, you don't know me, but if you knew me, you'd know not to bring up the topic of roundabout. But I'm just going to say there's going to be new requirements that roundabouts have traffic pedestrian signals for people with disabilities, and I'm hoping that's going to come soon. And we're going to have one in my town with our RFBs on it. So in about a year, I'll let you know whether it works or not, whether it helps motorists yield. But the other thing about roundabouts, the bicyclists should be concerned about. I'm Central Ohio, and we're the land of roundabouts. And we went for a bike ride today, and the only way we could cross the arterial was when there was a red light down the road. So I'm very concerned about lots of roundabouts and making it difficult for people to get out of the minor roads and cross the major roads because of lots of roundabouts.
We do not see the problems that you're describing. We're dealing with the folks that have sight conditions in Florida. We are putting in traffic control devices at those areas where we have a high population density of folks that are, especially around schools, that have where they're training people on how to use dogs and other ways to get around for the sighted area. But I think I said I would go back to this gentleman's question about the signs. I did not answer his question. He actually had the first question about signing. So the education, you can't fix education problems with signing. We've got to educate the public. So, and I've been using this question now for about 6 months. So how many of you, except for those of you who may have had a traffic violation and had to go back to a driver's safety handbook, have looked at the driver's handbook since you got your driver's license? This is a really high percentage. It's usually 10% or less. Even in audiences with 60 and 100 people, it's usually less than 10%. And I'm talking about transportation professionals. So we're not doing adequate. We're not adequately educating the public. And I can tell you, in the state of Florida, if you move to Florida from out of state, you do not even have to take the written test to get your driver's license in the state of Florida. One of the things that I have been talking to Highway Safety and Motor Vehicles, and again, this will require legislation, is to require, we have people, most of our population renews online now. And so when they go online to renew, part of what I propose to Highway Safety and Motor Vehicles, and this is, they like the idea, but it would require legislation, is that you have to go through and they have questions that we've been actively involved in putting questions in and information into the handbook about pedestrian and bicycle laws, is that they have to basically go through and take the test every time they do the renewal. And the challenge has been, so how do you do it and not make it punitive? So my idea was that when people miss the questions, our idea is to educate, not to be punitive. So you cycle them back to the handbook and they review those sections that they missed, and then they take it again. The benefit of this, the other benefit of this, is that we have a large percentage of the teen population who are not even getting driver's licenses, but they still want IDs. So by using the same online test, getting them to review the handbook and doing the same online test, at least they know what the traffic laws are, and it doesn't take them out of the classroom. That's a much more effective way than just signing.
This doctor. And he's blind.
So there are some technical questions I'd like to ask you, but I'm going to hold off on those. What I want to talk about is you both invoked this phrase, complete streets. And I always get defensive when I hear that phrase because of the way it seems to be interpreted, and also because it seems to frame the whole issue incorrectly so that it lends itself to being interpreted in a bad way. And, you know, basically, you know, the way I see it, a lot of the problems we have with street design is not that it's missing something, but that it has way too much of all kinds of things that it doesn't need. And we need not complete streets, but streets that are smaller and simpler. And so I'm just wondering, like, how do you interpret that phrase, complete streets?
Well, the way we're interpreting it is the way I tried to describe in the slides. Obviously, I'm not going into as much detail as I normally do when we do the Designing for Pedestrian Safety course, but as you get into places where there is more pedestrian and bicycle activity, that we put a higher priority in bicyclists and pedestrians, accommodating them at the expense of motorists. One of the things we're trying to do in these, again, in these places where cyclists and pedestrians are more active, is getting the speeds down. I blew past that slide, but trying to get them down instead of 30 or 35 miles an hour to 25 miles an hour, at least on our system. I'd like to see it at 20, but I think that's probably not going to be realistic.
Catch bikes.
I was just going to throw onto that, and I think something to look at with complete streets is it doesn't mean that we have to have every mode specifically accommodated on every single road. It means you design the street for the context of who's there and who's using the street. So if there is transit there, you make sure that we have accommodations for the transit vehicles and the users of transit. If it's a street that we need to have bicycling on, who's the bicyclist on those streets, and what are the speeds on those streets? So you might design a street, and Billy alluded to this really well. If there's a high transit usage, then we've got a lot of people walking and getting there, and they're trying to come in from the neighborhood. That might be one kind of bicycle accommodation. If we have more longer haul commuter bikes, that might look something different. So that's the professionals working with you and working with the community to help us understand the context and what kind of treatments would be most effective to accommodate everybody who needs to use it.
Hi, my name is Eli Carabell. I'm son of Karen and Harold, and I wanted to say big thanks, of course, to Shawn and Billy. And you guys are great. So I'm a very experienced cyclist. Of course, I'm the son of my beloved mother, and I learned a ton. But one thing I really wanted to mention is what I agree with you guys about is about safety. Over in the state of Illinois, there was a governor by the name of George Ryan. Many of you, maybe you know about him, maybe not. But what happened was he actually gave, in return for cash, he would give free people like me, CDLs, or anybody in this room who didn't know how to drive a tractor trailer. And these guys would get on the road, some of them were mentally ill and whatever, and they would hit people as they were driving because the governor was getting paid off to give them free licenses. And there was a woman and a family that was killed in a minivan in Illinois because of those free CDLs. So that stresses the importance of education. But the one question I really wanted to ask you is, because of what with Governor Ryan and all that stuff, what really can you do to foster a culture of safety and a culture of education instead of just a lot of words and a lot of stuff? We hear people talk all the time, but no action gets done. I've almost been killed on a bicycle about 3 times because of my own mistakes. A lot of it's behavior, okay? I have bad behavior. But how do we foster, again, a culture of good behavior and a culture of effectiveness, safety, and security, and not just talk? And by the way, I've had this conversation with John Schubert out of Pennsylvania about, instead of talking as an organization, how do we actually get things done to make people's life better? Because you know what? Tony Robbins, one of my favorite motivational speakers, who I hope to be like one day, he says, success requires massive action. And I don't want to hear any more talk. I want to hear massive action. All right, who gets the
I
box?
get
I can take an initial stab at that from again, from the transportation professionals. One thing that's come up in the last 6 years, starting in 2010, was they have this thing called the Highway Safety Manual. So in the past, when we talked about safety, we talked about it in terms of design elements, and it was always wider is better because it provides more clear zones, it makes it easier to drive. We're now going back and looking at decades worth of data, and we're seeing what actually works. And what we have found through this process is that there's big debate with street trees, right? Some communities hated street trees because, well, if a car goes off the road, it's a street tree, you hear motors. What we found is maybe street trees help slow down the traffic in the first place and make it more safe for pedestrians and actually more safe for everybody because people slow down. So we found in a lot of these areas, by slowing the traffic down through a number of different methods and means, we can make it a safer environment for everybody. So from our standpoint, we're looking at physical design and then understanding what really works versus an opinion of what people think might really work.
Going back to the question of culture, I mean, it takes leadership, and fortunately, we've had 2 secretaries in a row that have made this a priority. The change happening in our agency is happening very, very fast. The biggest challenge we have is the existing infrastructure. We have large signalized intersections. I mentioned earlier that about 50% of our fatalities and serious injuries occur at signalized intersections. And that's why we're using modern roundabouts, because they are safer for everyone. And there are times when we'll have to treat them differently based on the location, but we know for a fact that they are safer. Just the speed reduction makes it safer for all users. One of the big pushbacks we get is related to older road users not being able to use them, because we have a lot of retired folks in Southwest Florida. But we have a private development near Orlando that has 50 two-lane roundabouts. It's an age-restricted community, and the median age, which means half the population's above and half below, is 66. So the private developer wouldn't be putting them in if they weren't working in the private sector. But it requires leadership at every state level. It can't be done just in Florida. It has to be done statewide to change the culture, as you're describing. And education has to be part of the solution as well, as we've discussed.
I'd like to follow up on that as well, as what we're doing in the Orlando area. As some of you may know, we've been unfortunately at the top of the dangerous by design list for a number of years, particularly on pedestrian safety. And finally, our elected officials got off the seat and decided, okay, we really need to work this problem. And what's working in our area is bringing all the parties together in the same room on a regular basis and working all those E's and in a coordinated manner. And we're making that happen more closer to the central city center, and now we need to build it out to the more metropolitan scale, because people don't just stay within their own jurisdiction. So it's at the local level where you can really change the culture. We're seeing it happen in Orlando when it comes to driver yield rates to pedestrians. And so we know we can have an impact if we take that approach.
Hi, thank you all for being here. I'm a clerk for a small municipality here in Missouri, and my question has to do with law enforcement. I'm very surprised within my municipality the lack of empathy and education that my officers have in regards to cycling safety and rights. How do we get that word out and educate law enforcement about our rights and understand the safeties of us on the road?
Put them on bikes. One of the things you'll find when you actually talk to the law enforcement community is that they work in silos just like most everybody. So you have people that are in the traffic division. Those guys and ladies tend to know the traffic laws. You get outside of there and they have no clue, which is why we work with our police and sheriff's association to create the roll call videos, which they have to use as part of their ongoing education process. And so we're using the roll call videos as a way to educate them. And you can download those from our website.
Okay.
Yeah, I was going to say as well, and Mike pointed out earlier, this idea of getting the right people together at the table. So when you have older people, elected officials, the mayor that's interested in this, and you bring the engineering folks and the elected leaders and law enforcement all to talk about this issue, it's amazing how you can get things to move when you get the right people at the table. But like Billy said, historically, a lot of these agencies have worked in silos, and unless you have some leadership at the top who's interested in making a change, it's hard to do that.
Okay, I'm Sarah, and I have several nuts and bolts questions. And the first one is, how do you folks handle right on red? Now, rights on red, as far as I can tell, for cars are the most dangerous things ever, because seldom do cars actually ever stop and look to the right before they take off and drive. And I mean, all you have to do is see how many times watch pedestrians almost being killed when they have the right of way. So I had that question. I also had the question of again, with the police enforcement, how many law enforcement situations, aside from bicycle cops themselves, actually get out and bike or walk in the areas where they're supposed to be or it's required? Because that would be useful for people to just know what on-ground conditions look like. If you're going to be doing traffic, what you need to look for in terms of pedestrians. And then finally, how many, and this is a very simple question, how many urban planning courses or design engineering courses, like you folks have, traffic engineering courses, include bicycle and pedestrian policy? Or is it all based to looking at it from a bicycle point, from a car point of view? Are these other elements things that are only in grad school?
I can't answer the last two questions. The first question about right turn on reds, I would say most states, and Shawn may have different information, did not allow right turn on red until the energy crisis occurred. And it was at that point in time that right turn on reds were allowed to try to conserve fuel. The way we're dealing with it is we have signs that we put in place that don't allow right turn on reds where we have high pedestrian activity. I mean, I would like to see the law change because it's very, very difficult to enforce every intersection that has a signal, and even where we've put red light cameras in place in Florida, we've got elected officials that are trying to remove them even though they're proven effective to improve safety.
I'll answer the third question. I'm trying to remember what the second one was. But on the educational front, when you look at your typical undergraduate program, most of these students aren't selecting civil engineering until they're probably juniors. By the time they figure out they want to be a transportation engineer, they're at the end of the junior year, they're in their senior year, and they get 2, maybe 3 classes total. So most of that education at the university level is occurring at the graduate level. Now, I will say that there's been a big movement to include these issues. I've done it in my class at WashU in the undergraduate. Now, there might be one class, out of it gets integrated in. It's not a huge element, but it's definitely integrated. What I'll also tell you is that the students are interested in it. So one of the classes I teach, they have to do a course project. And when I first started, I've been teaching for a while now. When I first started teaching, they wanted to redesign interchanges. Now they want to create a bike rally, they want to do something. So almost all my projects now deal with bicycle pedestrian issues or some kind of public transportation. That's what they're interested in doing. The other element, which is probably just as important, is educating the professionals. Within ITE, the group that I'm in, there's a tremendous focus over the past several years and ongoing on having this type of educational elements moving forward with bicycle facilities and pedestrian facilities and these types of things. So we offer a lot of webinars at our annual meeting, right? We just met down in Anaheim this summer. A lot of that focuses on these kinds of issues. What we need, again, is we have an understanding of what this is, but I think having your insights into how the system works and what doesn't is really important to help us become educated. So Martin actually wrote a journal article for the IT Journal, and that was fantastic, right? So I'd encourage you all, I don't know if anybody else besides Martin's an IT member, but to get involved in our organizations and help educate us on things that work well and don't work well, so as we're doing our designs, we can do those things better. What was the second question?
Bicycle, law enforcement, bicycles.
Oh, I couldn't tell you what percentage of those folks get out and move around. I'll tell you, it depends on the municipality and what their priorities are, right? So in the city of St. Louis, and there's times when that's the lowest thing, that's the last, they get bigger issues that they're worried about, right? So again, you've got to get to the elected leadership and make this a priority and something that those folks would need to be concerned about. Sometimes they're concerned with bigger issues than that.
So I'm really excited to hear you talking about database, data-driven approaches to road design, and really excited about extending that to cycling design. I feel like there are plenty of engineering solutions and infrastructure that is really good, beneficial things for all road users, but I also feel like there are things out there that as they're currently being implemented, have a lot of challenges. And one of the ones that I saw in both of your presentations is sort of the bicycle side path, the bi-directional side path. And just the number of conflict points that you get at each drive out and intersection, I think makes that a really, it's a design that I'd like to see a lot more data on. And I realize that's one of our big challenges is getting the complexity and the richness of data from bicycle-involved collisions and crashes as we're getting from police data sets. As far as just the general overall, at least here in Missouri, it isn't being collected at the same level by default. And I'd love to see that happening more. Anyway, mostly I like the idea of joining the memberships and trying to get out word of what is working and what isn't working. But that's I think that's one of the concerns about complete streets is that sometimes some of these facilities going in do wind up making it more complicated to use the road in as safe a manner as possible without getting extra harassment.
Sure. You know, the thing that we have to do is that we have to look at every tool, because every tool is not right in every place. And so side paths, for example, we're not going to put side paths in a corridor that has a lot of driveways. Right? We're going to be putting them in on our higher speed suburban arterials have a fairly high level of access control, which means there's not a lot of driveways. But the other thing that we're doing is we are doing a lot more data collection. As we're putting in new treatments, we're doing before and after to look at the safety benefits and fixing the things that need to be fixed. But you know, one of the focus here is obviously safety for bicyclists, but my frustration state, not just around bicycle safety and pedestrian safety, but the lack of focus on transportation safety nationally. This past year, we had 120 people dying on our roads every day. Every single day, 120 people dying on our roads. And there doesn't seem to be a political or law enforcement or public concern about the carnage that happens on our roads every day. And so it needs to be elevated at a higher level across the board.
You know, one of the frustrations I have with the data, and it's something I've learned through different studies I've done, unless a motor vehicle is involved in the collision, it doesn't get into the database. So for us to actually get data on some of these facilities is pretty difficult. If a motor vehicle is involved, we know what happened. But if a motor vehicle maybe almost hit somebody and they ran into a guardrail or something, we wouldn't even know about that. You've got to get hospital records and all kinds of other things to try to find that data. So I'd advocate for a change in the basic reporting requirements that if a bicycle and right. So there's a lack of data in some of that, and I think we will be curious as we move ahead. These side paths and buffer bike lanes, all that's pretty new. So and that's where again, as you guys, if you all have experience and you're finding something that doesn't work, and the bicycle lanes next to the door zone was an early example of that. To have a mechanism to communicate that back and say, you know what, you have this treatment, but it doesn't work, and here's issues, places where it hasn't worked, and here's why. We can sit down together and figure out how to fix that if there's areas that have problems.
It's only been fairly recently that law enforcement actually gets training in crash reporting. When I was a state roadway design engineer and I was talking to our law enforcement partners back then, I asked them, how many of you get training, because we have road-related crashes in the report. I said, how many of you get training on what all the road-related causes are? And none of them did at that point in time, back in 2002.
Yes, I'm John Allen from Boston. I heard you talking about the advent of robotically controlled vehicles, and also about narrower travel lanes. I'm wondering whether those two concepts don't actually contradict each other, because objectively, a wider lane is safer for drivers. There's more maneuvering room. The problem is in trying to change behavior by changing the environment. And once you get to robotically controlled vehicles, you don't have to play that trick on driver behavior because the car is doing the driving. And what I see is both with travel lanes, and one good example on that Winter Park Street, I think it was Baldwin Park Street, the narrow one without bike lanes, and with bicycle facilities, is they keep, the bicyclists get shoved into narrow spaces, the door zone, the separate bikeway, and now we're talking about making streets narrower as well. What's going to happen when we get not only the robotic vehicles, but also electrically assisted bicycles, that suddenly now everyone is strong, although maybe not fearless, because they have a little motor to help them go along. And we're not talking about the 8-mile-an-hour Dutch bicyclist, which seems to be the model for the typical bicycle facility.
So I guess a lot there. So to start maybe picking apart at that a little bit. What we found with the data, and historically, if you go back to standard highway design practice, it's been the 12-foot lane. And I don't know where the 12-foot lane came from, but it's been a 12-foot lane forever. And it's probably appropriate for interstate freeways, but we have found through these crash databases is that a 12-foot lane is not safer than an 11-foot or 10.5-foot lane in an urban setting. It's actually safer to have narrower because it does slow people down. When we get into the world of connected autonomous vehicles, there's a lot of arguments that says we can get by maybe with an 8 or 9-foot lane because these cars don't need the tolerances that human drivers have, right? They can drive much more precisely, and we can make better use of that space, maybe dedicate more sidewalks, that kind of thing. There's a lot of these discussions moving forward that are going to have to be vetted out, because I think for a long time what we're going to have is a mixed environment. In my own personal opinion is, we have a farm up in northern Missouri. I cut down trees and split wood. I don't know how I'm going to tell a robot to go hook the chain up to the tailgate and pull the tree stuff out of the ground. I just know how that happens, right? I drove a convertible here, and you're not taking the steering wheel out of the convertible. I don't drive a motorcycle, but we're not taking the steering wheel away from me. So I want to have the option, though. I mean, there's times when I'm going to want to be able to push it and say, take me to Minneapolis, I'll wake up and wake me up and get there. So I think we're going to have this mixed environment for a really long time, which is going to complicate things. But what we do know is in these urban areas, these narrower lane treatments are effective in slowing people down, and that makes it safe for everybody overall. And it doesn't add a lot of delay. That's the other thing, which is a big deal. Going through town at 25 miles an hour versus 35 miles an hour really doesn't take you a whole lot longer. The delays incurred at the traffic signals along the way, and if we can coordinate that stuff, it's not much of an inconvenience. I don't know if that, it started to answer the question.
It's going to take years to answer, I think. Really.
Yes. And you all need to be involved in that conversation moving forward. Again, to make sure that your perspective is appreciated in how those things play out.
Thank you both for your presentation. Billy and yours, something that caught my eye was trying to light up intersections, so both for pedestrians to cross, and the whole idea, the whole thing with like LEDs and lights at night, and issues with glare, and coming from a dark place into maybe an accessibly lighted place. So just trying to find that balance is like a concern that I have.
We can, one of the benefits of those LEDs is that you can control the light levels better. We have a lot of coastal areas where we have sea turtle nesting, so lighting is always a big issue there. The other thing that we have is we're putting in more mid-block pedestrian crossings with rectangular rapid flashing beacons and other treatments. And one of the other things that we're doing at those locations is dimming the lights down, and then when they're activated, they brighten up, which again will help get the driver's attention. So there's ways to deal with that.
There's a whole science of lighting design, so there's people that's all they do, and it gets into this issue of front lighting versus back lighting, those kind of things. So again, I mean, we have an idea of what works, but for the most part, those issues are being thought of and hopefully taken care of through design.
Yeah, hi, I'm Gary Zico from Los Angeles. One follow-up from John's. I was at Interbike last week in Las Vegas. The e-bike thing is crazy. I mean, there was a whole huge neighborhood of e-bikes. I don't know how much how's it gonna pan out, but they are our allies. I mean, people jumping on bikes and go 28 miles an hour in California, 25 is the residential speed limit, right? So they are gonna have to be bicycle drivers to be safe. But that's one thing we should plug into. But my big question is, to see guys like you up there, you know, sort of leaders in your field, engineers, understanding that bicyclists can drive and have lane rights, it's just so refreshing and so helpful. How does that happen? How did you guys turn into what you are? How can we recreate this environment, this context? Are you just really at the long tail outliers, or what can we do to make this happen in California, and Illinois, and New York, and these other states?
Well, I mentioned Dan Burton earlier. About a year after I became the state roadway design engineer, I went out west with Dan. I took 2 weeks off, and he toured me through all these cities that were already doing this stuff back in the mid-90s, and that's what I call my conversion experience. And then I was fortunate enough to live in the city of Orlando, where I have friendships with Terry and Mike as well. But I think that, I mean, the momentum is changing. You know, when I look at our state, it's primarily the cities. If I go through my district or through the state, and I look at who, from a local municipalities government standpoint, where is the change being driven? It's primarily being driven by the cities, not by the counties. And there's just something about the form of counties in Florida that they operate differently. The cities, most of the cities absolutely get it. They're at different stages, but I think it's having a demanding public. And the other thing with our initiative is that as I've been putting this, the policy in place and the implementation plan in place, which, by the way, a policy doesn't get you very far. You've got to have an implementation plan to change the culture, which is what we're doing. But the other thing I've done is I've made over 160 presentations to professionals, to local governments, to professional groups, to get the word out so that the political pressure from outside the agency will be sustained over time.
So I'll tell you my little personal story, and then get into a little broader. So, and Karen and I were debating over Facebook, and she said, "Hey, we're going to go for a bike ride." So we agreed we were going to ride from my office down at Creveport Park, which is a nice little park, and I kind of picked that route because Olive Boulevard is it's about 30,000 cars a day. It's got bike lanes on it, and I said, "All right, we'll cruise down the bike lanes. It's got a nice shoulder, and we'll get to the park." So Karen shows up at my office, and she said, "Hey, we need to talk about the route." And I said, "Okay, what do we need to talk about?" She goes, "Well, there's bike lanes out there, I noticed." I go, "Yeah." She goes, "We're not using them, they're dangerous." And I had that moment of, this woman is crazy, and should I ask her to leave now, right? So we talked about it. We agreed, okay, we'd stay in the bike lanes for a while, and then we'd get out into the traffic lane. So I'd hang with her, and it wasn't bad, right? It was down a hill, and we weren't really, and we were between platoons, right? So I think we had somebody yell something at us, but for the most part, it was pretty good. And then we got to the bottom of this hill, and I looked at her, and I said, "Please tell me you don't plan on riding back up this hill." And she said, "No, that'd be crazy in this traffic, right? This is the evening rush hour." And I said, "Okay, she's completely sane. I can trust her." But that got me asking the question. So one of the conversation we've had is they say that bicycle drivers are maybe 5% of the bicycle riders. But I would be really curious to know, and I have no idea what the data is. If we look at overall roadway miles, what's your percentage? You might be 30, 35, 40% of roadway miles, right? So you are an important user group. So I guess I took it upon myself that I need to understand what it is you do, why it is you do it, and as I started learning, there's a lot of things that make a lot of sense, right? So when I was a bicycle commuter in the past, I was an edge rider because I didn't know any different, and I hated it. When we do road work, when we're on the shoulder, we close the lane usually because we want to give a buffer, right? So it's that same concept that we provide that, and those traffic control principles relate over. So what it comes down to is people that are in my field, we really do care. And we really do want to make a better environment for everybody. We need to have you all reach out to us and help us understand where the issues are. Now, what I've seen in the past is that there are people that reach out and say, "Well, I don't want the shared side path because everybody ought to be riding the traffic lane," and there's been this conflict between the infrastructure people and the bicycle driver people.
Really?
Yeah. And Karen calls me the big tent guy because I think that we can provide facilities for everybody. We just gotta figure out how to do it. So if you come at it in a collaborative way and say, listen, I know that we're putting in a shared use path because we have a lot of transit users and we really want to facilitate that community, but what about me and my commute, and my people that I commute with? What is that, what are you doing for me? And force that conversation to make sure that if you aren't a, hey, we don't have to worry about them, they'll take care of themselves, that you're actually put into the plan. So we did a Great Streets plan in Overland, and we had two routes. We had the bicycle driver route on one street, and over next to it, we had the family route, we called it. So you've got to have that conversation and make sure that you're being accommodated and that you educate people about why that's important. But as transportation professionals, the vast majority, and I can't speak for every single person, we want to do the right thing, we want to accommodate you.
Well, I was thinking that is actually just an excellent place to leave off because